Welcome to the Underclass Podcast with Austin Picard. I'm an independent researcher who can't stomach being lied to on a daily basis by the mainstream media. While we live in a fracturing society, launched into parallel realities, falling perfectly onto the two sides of the political spectrum, I remain in the underclass. Dennis Hastert was the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives from 1999 to 2007 and remains the longest-serving Republican Speaker of the House in history. While serving as Speaker, Hastert instituted what became known as the Hastert Rule, which was an informal, self-imposed political practice of allowing the House to vote on only those bills that were supported by the majority of its majority party members. In The Atlantic, congressional expert Norm Ornstein writes that Hastert blew up the House's regular order, which is a mix of rules and norms that allows debate, deliberation, and amendments in committees and on the House floor, that incorporates and does not shut out the minority, even if it still loses most of the time, that takes bills that pass both houses to a conference committee to reconcile differences, and that allows time for members and staff to read, digest, and analyze bills. Ornstein commented that no speaker did more to relegate the regular order to the sidelines than Hastert. The House is a very partisan institution, with rules structured to give even tiny majorities enormous leverage. But Hastert took those realities to a new and more tribalized partisan plane. As Speaker, Hastert shepherded the USA Patriot Act in October 2001 to passage in the House, even claiming credit in a 2011 interview over the misgivings of many members. An article published in Vanity Fair September 2005 revealed that during her work, former FBI translator Sybil Edmonds had heard Turkish wiretap targets boast of covert relations with Hastert. According to the article, the targets reportedly discussed giving Hastert tens of thousands of dollars in surreptitious payments in exchange for political favors and information. The Hill subsequently reported, following his congressional career, Hastert conveniently received a $35,000 per month contract lobbying on behalf of Turkey. On May 28, 2015, a 7-page indictment of Hastert by a federal grand jury was unsealed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago. According to multiple reports, the indictment charged former Speaker Hastert with unlawfully structuring the withdrawal of $952,000 in cash in order to evade the requirement that banks report cash transactions over $10,000 and making false statements to the FBI about the purpose of his withdrawals. The indictment alleges that Hastert agreed to make payments of $3.5 million to an unnamed subject, identified in the indictment only as an individual A from Yorkville, Illinois, who was known to Hastert for most of individual A's life. The indictment stated that the payments were to compensate for and conceal Hastert's prior misconduct, but did not specify the exact nature of the past misconduct referred to. A Vox article written by senior correspondent Dylan Matthews was given the appropriate title, "A Man 2 Heartbeats Away from the Presidency Was a Serial Child Molester," and proceeded to claim that although Hastert had been sentenced to 15 months in federal prison after pleading guilty in October to one count of structuring currency transactions, that's not what the case was really about. What it was really about was Hastert's repeated molestation of male students as a teacher and wrestling coach at Yorkville High School in suburban Chicago over 30 years ago. The feds just happened to catch him withdrawing cash improperly to pay as hush money to one of his former victims. This isn't merely an allegation. Dennis Hastert, former third-ranking member of the United States federal government, admitted in open court to molesting children. Hastert said, "I'm sorry to those I hurt and misled. First, I wanted to apologize for the boys I mistreated when I was their coach. What I did was wrong and I regret it. They looked to me, and I took advantage of them." Under questioning from federal judge Thomas Durkin, Hastert acknowledged sexually abusing at least 3 wrestlers. Nothing is more disturbing than having serial child molester and Speaker of the House in the same sentence, Judge Durkin said upon sentencing Hastert. The sentence, which also required Hastert to pay $250,000, spend 2 years on supervised release, and register for sex offender treatment, was stiffer than that requested by prosecutors, who initially asked for 0 to 6 months as part of his plea deal. 1 week after the indictment, Jolene Burge told ABC's Good Morning America that Hastert abused her late brother Stephen Reinbold when Reinbold was the wrestling team's student equipment manager. Hastert also ran an explorers group, of which Steve Reinbold was a member, and led the group on a diving trip to the Bahamas. In the interview, Burge stated that in 1979, 8 years after Reinbold's high school graduation in 1971, her brother had told her that he had been sexually abused by Hastert throughout his 4 years of high school. Burge said that she was stunned by this news, and that her brother said that he had never told anyone before because he did not think that anyone would believe him. Reinbold died of AIDS in 1995. Hastert, then a member of the House leadership, attended the funeral, angering Burge, who reportedly said, "I was just there. I was trying to bite my tongue, thinking that blood was coming out. So after he had gone through the line, I followed him out into the parking lot of the funeral home. I said, 'I want to know why you did what you did to my brother.' And he just stood there and stared at me. He didn't say, 'What are you talking about, or what? I don't know what you're talking about.' He just stood there and stared at me. Then I just continued to say, 'I want you to know your secret didn't die in there with my brother. And I want you to remember that I'm out here and that I know.' And again, he just stood there and he did not say a word." A man 2 heartbeats away from the presidency was a serial child molester. Dennis Hastert was a prolific pedophile for decades, and according to the deposition of Sybil Edmonds, the FBI had even been aware of this while he was Speaker of the House. This revelation caused many to consider the possibility that Hastert had potentially been compromised by his salacious dirt in some kind of political blackmail operation and subsequently used as a controlled asset. One would imagine that his political colleagues would attempt to distance themselves at the very least for the public relations optics, if not the ethical implications. However, both the Chicago Tribune and Associated Press reported that 60 letters asking for leniency for Hastert were submitted to the court ahead of sentencing. But 19 of these letters were withdrawn after Judge Durkin said that he would not consider any letters that were not made public. Of the 41 letters that were made public, several were from current or former members of Congress: John Doolittle, David Dreyer, Thomas Ewing, and Porter Goss, who also is a former CIA director. At the sentencing hearing on April 27, 2016, Jolene Burge, the sister of Steve Reinbold, read a letter that her brother had written shortly before his death in 1995. Addressing Hastert, Burge stated that she wanted to hold him accountable for sexually abusing her brother. She said, "I knew your secret, and you couldn't bribe or intimidate your way out. You think you can deny your abuse of Steve because he can no longer speak for himself. That's why I'm here." Dennis Hastert could not be prosecuted for any of the acts of sexual abuse of which he had been accused because the applicable statute of limitations had expired decades earlier. In July 2017, after serving almost 13 months of his 15-month sentence for the felony structuring charge, he was released from federal prison and returned to Chicago under residential reentry management supervision. He remains one of the highest-ranking American politicians ever sentenced to prison. Considering the moral depths of our political landscape and the baseless smear tactics often utilized in partisan politics, you would think that such an incendiary claim would come up from time to time. Today we embark on a dark and twisted odyssey, charting our course through unprecedented turbulence as we stumble upon a national secret, a tale of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. A story revealing a nationwide pedophile network pandering children to America's power elite, along with details of its cover-up by state and federal law enforcement. The Franklin scandal exposes our cognitive dissonance, forcing us to grapple with the psychological consequences of a corrupt system designed to protect prolific predators in the elite strata of society who have strategically forged political connections and media influence. Our story begins with Lawrence E. King, who was the manager of the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska. According to a local Omaha newspaper who profiled Lawrence King around the time he performed the national anthem at the 1984 Republican Convention, King, in fact, did more than just attend. He threw a little reception party honoring Reagan administration minority appointments. The host committee included Gerald Ford, Senators John McCain and Jack Kemp, Drew Lewis, and Al Haig, to name a few. Citing the work of the brilliant journalist, investigator, and author Nick Bryant, who wrote the preeminent work on this subject in the form of his book, The Franklin Scandal, he poetically describes the lurid tale of Franklin, to borrow an adjective from the New York Times in 1988, begins with Larry King, not the CNN talk show host, but Lawrence King Jr. of Omaha, who sang the national anthem at the 1984 Republican Convention in Dallas, and throughout the 80s was described as a GOP high roller and the fastest rising African American star in the Republican Party. Tall and corpulent, King had a fondness for flowers, fine-tailored suits, expensive cars, mansions, chartered jets, and glistening jewelry. He had a hand in an array of businesses, but his day job was general manager of the Franklin Federal Credit Union, created to provide loans for Omaha's underserved black community. On November 4, 1988, federal agents descended on the Franklin Credit Union. The National Credit Union Administration would ultimately conclude that $39.4 million had been stolen. King was indicted on 40 counts, which included conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Current Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, then chairman of the Equal Opportunity Commission, described King as a friendly person and said his legal travails were unfortunate. Larry King had been dogged by accusations of pedophilia for a number of years. Among the first accusers was Ulysses Washington, who claimed King flew her to out-of-state pedophilic orgies. She had been adopted by relatives of King's in the 1970s. Her new mother was King's cousin, Barbara Webb, and her new father was husband Jarrett Webb, who sat on the board of the Franklin Credit Union. To Ulysses Washington, King had been Uncle Larry. Larry King set up the pedophile ring, says Ulysses. From my knowledge and from what I saw go down, he was the man who got it moving and rolling. Everything went through him. He loves boys. He loves them like he shouldn't.
Yeah, Larry King set it all up. From my knowledge and what I saw and how stuff went down, he was the man that got the stuff moving, and rolling. Everything went through him like, you know, he loves boys though. He loves them. He loves them like he shouldn't love them.
Shortly after the Franklin raid, rumors of the nationwide pedophile network swept Nebraska, and in January of 1989, a subcommittee of the state's legislature convened in Lincoln to investigate both Franklin's looting and the whispers of far worse crimes. The subcommittee would be called the Franklin Committee, and it was chaired by the 64-year-old Loren Schmidt, a corn farmer, stalwart Republican, and 24-year veteran of Nebraska's legislature. The Franklin Committee had not even started its work when Schmidt received his first anonymous phone call. Schmidt told reporters for British television that the caller had urged him to drop the inquiry because it would reach the highest levels of the Republican Party. King's cousin Barbara Webb had adopted a number of children by this time, and according to a report from social services, in 3 separate incidents, 5 children have run away from the Webb home. Those children were Wally and Kevin, June 1985, Tracy and Robert, August 1985, and Lisa, November 1985. Repeated allegations of physical abuse told to our department by 6 children during separate interviews, of being struck for long periods of time while naked by various objects, including a belt, rubber hose, and the railroad prop, denial of meals in the home, sexual abuse of Lisa by her foster father Jarrett, supported by a polygraph test given to Lisa on January 30th, 1986. No one in social services acted on this information, despite the fact that Lisa, or Ulysses, was supported by a polygraph. Ulysses was then placed in another foster home, where she had reportedly got to know her foster mother very well and admitted to her that she had been transported and flown as a part of a pedophile network that was run by Lawrence E. King. Ulysses claimed that many of the children on the flight were from the Boys Town facility, and her foster mother happened to know a youth worker at the time who worked at the infamous Boys Town orphanage in Omaha, Nebraska. Julie Walters, the youth worker, subsequently penned a 46-page report on the abuse, naming a number of children from Boys Town in her report. February 19, 1990, serves as the first documented intervention by the FBI, who will proceed to do everything in its power to cover up this network and derail any hope for an honest investigation. Joni Gregory was a social worker for Department of Social Services. She is responsible for investigating families who are applying for foster care licenses. Her duties also include on-site checks when renewal or a foster care license is needed. While she was inspecting the home of Jarrett and Barbara Webb for a renewal of their license, she felt as if something was wrong with the Webb household. The kids would appear as perfect mannequins when she visited, but she sensed that something was wrong. As she proceeded to investigate the Webb household, she was issued a warning by the FBI, and as the story goes, she wrote a letter to the DSS in Lincoln, receiving no response. After a couple of months, she wrote a letter to the Omaha Police Department regarding this same situation with the Webbs. She was then contacted by the FBI. In the meantime, she had tried to do some research on her own, but evidently some files were missing. The FBI further informed Joni Gregory that it would probably be in her best interest if she forgot this information. Nick Bryant wrote in his book that Ulysses Washington's initial allegations of child abuse appeared in a 1988 report from Nebraska's Foster Care Review Board, a state agency that reviews the plans, services, and placements of children in out-of-home care to ensure their optimum welfare. Though the report contained a series of allegations about King, its centerpiece consisted of interviews of Eulise by a Boys Town youth worker. Eulise stated that she and Boys Town students had been transported across state lines for sexual exploitation. After the board requested a law enforcement investigation, its report moved through channels at the Omaha Police Department and the State Attorney General's office in July of 1988. In the absence of child abuse indictments, the state house swelled with rumors of a cover-up. Ultimately, the Omaha Police Department launched a child pornography investigation into Lawrence King, generating a number of reports. The first report was dated May 5, 1988, and helped expose the many different apartments King had rented around Omaha where he allegedly stashed his victims. In the second report generated by the OPD in this investigation, the police interview a Karen Beveridge, who was the property manager of the Mason Apartments and also of the Orpheum Tower Apartments, concerning information she possibly has of a Larry King, who had previously rented an apartment in the Orpheum Tower between January of 1987 and January of 1988. Recorded in her official statement to the OPD, Karen Beveridge stated that she heard that Larry King is a homosexual and has a preference of young men or boys. The third report shows investigators conducted an additional interview with an alleged victim by the name of Shawnetta Moore. The report states, on this date, reporting officer Earl Carmine received a telephone call from a party previously identified by reporting officer and identified as Shawnetta Renee Moore, age 15. Moore is currently hospitalized at Richard Young. Reporting officer had previously interviewed Moore concerning incidents of child pornography and devil worship. During the interview, she stated that Larry King was involved in these incidents, beginning when she was only 10 years old. During reporting officer's interview with her on Thursday, June 30th, 1988, Moore stated that King has sex and drug parties at a house he owns on Wirt Street. At the time of that interview, however, Moore could not recall the specific address of King's residence. As the Omaha Police Department was pursuing this investigation, the official reports suddenly stopped, and no more reports were generated. An interoffice memo dated March 3, 1989, surfaced from the OPD, written by police officer Chris Carmine, who had originally been assigned the investigation into Larry King. In the memo, Officer Carmine wrote, I became involved in the investigation of Larry King in either June or July of 1988. During the period of the investigation, there were rumors being circulated that Chief Wadman was friends with Larry King, and that Chief Wadman had stayed at Larry King's home while in Washington, D.C. Because I was concerned that either Carlson or someone else connected with the Foster Care Review Board might contact Chief Wadman about the investigation, and that Chief Wadman, should the rumors about his association with King have any validity, might inform King of the investigation. I told Carlson that Chief Wadman was unaware of the investigation. Officer Carmine, who had generated the original reports, felt that the investigation had been stymied from the outset. He believed that there were many leads that should have been followed up on, and that the case was intentionally thwarted, leaving him disgruntled with the outcome of the non-investigation. By July 5, 1989, another interoffice memo surfaced from the OPD. This time, Police Chief Robert Wadman himself was the author. Seemingly upset after his relationship with Larry King had been exposed, he sent a communication to the Public Safety Director with the subject line reading, Supervisory Referral of Officer Carmine. The report stated, I am requesting a supervisory referral for Officer Carmine to see police psychologist Dr. Stephen Sheritz. I am basing this request on the actions demonstrated by Officer Carmine that surfaced during the Larry King investigation. This negative information seemed to fall into two areas. Number one, that the Omaha Police Division was aware of these sexual improprieties by Mr. King and did not investigate them. And number two, that due to Mr. King's influence and association with myself, I intentionally hindered the investigation of Larry King. The report that had been written by Boys Town social worker Julie Walters ultimately reached the Foster Care Review Board, including additional accounts from other victims. Director of the Foster Care Review Board, Carolyn Stitt, wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the state of Nebraska, Mr. Robert M. Spire. Pursuant to the Nebraska child abuse statutes, the State Foster Care Review Board is making a report of allegations of a child exploitation ring and respectfully requests an investigation. But there would be no investigation. The OPD had halted any investigation into the allegations, and the state attorney general would basically ignore the request for investigation made by the Foster Care Review Board. All of this unwanted attention focused on the Franklin Federal Credit Union triggered an audit, which was long overdue because of the fact that federally insured credit unions are required to be audited yearly. The Franklin Credit Union had not been audited in over 4 years. The audit revealed that Lawrence E. King's Franklin Credit Union was short $39.5 million, which spurred the Nebraska Senate to form the Franklin Committee to investigate King and his failed credit union. Allegations of child abuse quickly began to surface after the formation of the Franklin Committee because the people within the Foster Care Review Board and Social Services began communicating with the senators. The New York Times would even publish an article with the headline, "A Lurid, Mysterious Scandal Begins Taking Shape in Omaha." The Lincoln Journal quoted Attorney General Spire and Police Chief Wadman, claiming that they denied lack of action on child abuse case. Attorney General Spire claimed, "We did receive some sensitive information in July. My office acted promptly and professionally, and nothing was sat on." According to the book The Franklin Scandal, in early 1989, the Franklin Committee issued a subpoena to the Assistant Attorney General, demanding that the Attorney General's office surrender its reports relating to King and child abuse. But Attorney General Robert Spire refused to honor the subpoena. Spire's investigator Thomas Flahulis would be called before the Franklin Committee and confess that he hadn't interviewed a single alleged victim and had referred all victim debriefings to the OPD. The Omaha Chief of Police Robert Wadman told the Lincoln Journal that the OPD had pursued all leads and found them unsubstantiated. "Every step that should have been taken was taken," he said. Yet Chief Robert Wadman would later confess that the OPD never contacted Ulysses, and 3 months after Wadman's remarks, the Boys Town youth worker who had interviewed Ulysses told the Omaha World Herald that the OPD had never contacted her either. In February of 1989, the Franklin Subcommittee's chief investigator sent a memo to its members. What appears to be documented cases of child abuse and sexual abuse dating back several years with no enforcement action taken by the appropriate agencies is mind-boggling, wrote Jerry Lowe. The information that became public in 1988 relative to Larry King's family connection with one of the principals is cause for further concern. Condensed chapters of the book can be found at thefranklinscandal.com, where it's reported that King was noticeably absent from the controversy that swirled around him. On February 7, 1990, U.S. Magistrate Richard Koff ordered that King be sent to a federal medical facility in Springfield, Missouri, for a mental health evaluation, without a formal motion from King's attorneys. King was picked up and dispatched the day before President George H.W. Bush was to speak at a political fundraiser in Omaha. Having named Bush as one of his personal friends, King had reportedly purchased a ticket for the event and had subsequently been detained by the Secret Service. An article published at Consortium News in 2019 and authored by the incredible journalist Elizabeth Voss provides an additional perspective we can apply to Franklin. The title of the article, Long Before Epstein, Sex Traffickers and Spy Agencies. The Franklin scandal erupted in 1988, centering on a child trafficking ring operating in Omaha, Nebraska by Lawrence E. King, Jr., a former vice chairman of the National Black Republican Council. It was alleged that children were provided to politicians in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, among other illegal activities. The late former state senator John DeCamp alleged in his book The Franklin Cover-Up that a special committee of the Nebraska legislature launched a probe to investigate the affair, which involved King being indicted for embezzling money from the Franklin Credit Union. The committee hired former Lincoln, Nebraska police officer Jerry Lowe, whose reports suggested that King was involved in guns and money transfers to Nicaragua and was linked with the CIA. James Flannery, an investigative reporter at the World Herald who reported on the scandal, told associates that King was running guns and money into Nicaragua and that the CIA was heavily involved. Like many scandals before and since, the Franklin case ended with no prosecution of the perpetrators. However, Paul Bonacci, one of the alleged victims, was indicted for perjury. He had alleged that he was sexually abused as a minor in Nebraska and around the country, where he was flown by Lawrence King. In 1999, the Omaha World Herald reported Bonacci was awarded $1 million in damages due to his lawsuit against King and other alleged perpetrators. DeCamp, who was Bonacci's attorney, told the newspaper, "Obviously you don't award $1 million if you don't think Bonacci was telling the truth." One of the first pictures of a missing child ever to be featured on milk cartons as part of a campaign to find missing children was the picture of a 12-year-old boy by the name of Johnny Gosch. He had been a paper boy in West Des Moines, Iowa, who disappeared between 6 and 7 a.m. on September 5, 1982, shortly after leaving home before dawn to begin his paper route. He is presumed to have been kidnapped. As of 2023, there have been no arrests made, and the case is now considered cold, but remains open. His mother, Noreen Gosch, said that Johnny escaped from his captors and visited her with an unidentified man in 1997. She said that her son told her that he had been the victim of a pedophile organization and had been cast aside when he was too old, but subsequently feared for his life and lived under an assumed identity, feeling it was not safe to return home. The case received renewed publicity in 2006 when his mother said she had found photographs on her doorstep depicting Gosch in captivity. Some of the photos received were said to be children from a case in Florida, but one boy in the photos was never identified. Noreen Gosch insists that boy is Johnny. Citing a comprehensive article written by Thomas Muller at Winter Watch, the morning of his kidnapping, a neighbor named Mike reported to police that he observed Johnny talking to a stocky man in a blue two-toned Ford Fairmont with Nebraska plates. Mike didn't know what was discussed because he observed the interaction from his bedroom window. As Johnny headed toward home, Mike noticed another man emerge from the bushes and follow Johnny. Another witness, John Rossi, saw a man in a blue car talking to Johnny and thought something was strange. Then, Johnny simply vanished. On August 12, 1984, Eugene Martin, another Des Moines area paperboy, disappeared under similar circumstances while delivering newspapers on the south side of town. Authorities said they were unable to prove a connection between the two cases, yet months before Eugene's abduction, Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, went to police to warn them of a possible plot to abduct another boy. The tip-off came from a private investigator who was searching for her son. Noreen told police that the kidnapping would take place the second weekend in August 1984, and it would be a paper boy from the south side of Des Moines. These cases fall under the general umbrella of what later came to be known as the Franklin cover-up. In August 1984, Noreen testified in Senate hearings and spoke about organized pedophilia and its alleged role in her son's abduction. She began receiving death threats. She then states that she started getting tips, intel, and personal protection from a mafia operative working to counter pedophile rings. To accept the Franklin scenario, one needs to examine and believe the accounts of two individuals, Noreen Gosch and Paul Bonacci, a man who confessed to being involved in the abduction of Johnny. The core of Noreen's personal account involves the egregious misconduct of law enforcement in her son's case. She accuses them of being party to organized pedocracy kidnappings and provides numerous convincing details. In 1997, 15 years after his kidnapping, her son appeared on her doorstep in the middle of the night and visited with her for a few hours. He didn't say where he was living or where he was going, Noreen recalls. He told her he was in hiding, and he told her to tell no one she had seen him. Noreen revealed his visit 2 years later when testifying to a grand jury. Paul Bonacci was recruited into and entrapped by the Franklin pedophile network at the age of 12. In 1989, he accused Republican Party activist and businessman Lawrence E. King, who served as director of the Franklin Credit Union, of running an underage prostitution ring and victimizing him since an early age. Bonacci was also forced to run herd over the other boys caught in the ring. Bonacci confessed to playing a role in Johnny's abduction, claiming that he chloroformed the nabbed boy inside the getaway car. Noreen met with Paul in a jailhouse to hear his story. She says Bonacci told her things he could know only from talking with her son. Bonacci did a series of revealing interviews detailing some of the functions of the network and how it would operate. For instance, in the following 1993 interview, he describes being present at the founding of NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association, in a Boston Catholic church.
From 78 to 86, and that was New York and Boston. I was involved with NAMBLA.
He was in NAMBLA?
Yeah, he was the founder of NAMBLA.
Oh, yeah. David Thorstad?
Yeah. David, was it? David, I know his name, but hold on. That's something right now. I don't remember it.
How did Thorstad tie into these other people?
He got tied in with Carlson because he was associated with some people that Carlson knew and stuff. Some of Carlson's group was getting involved with NAMBLA because of what they did and what Carlson and them were doing. They agreed with this, so they had contacts with them and stuff. And David Thorstad came in and talked to him and stuff, and took a liking.
He came in to Omaha and talked to him on a lecture, or just talked to him?
He talked to them socially.
Uh-huh.
No, a lecture. He talked to them socially and stuff. And he came in and stuff, and I was at the party that he was at and stuff, and a couple other. He had some kid that he brought with him, and he took a liking to me and this other kid that was there at the parties and stuff that Carlson had and stuff, and he told him that, he talked to us and stuff, and he decided that he wanted us to come out to his place and stuff once in a while.
Where did he live?
Out in New York or Boston. I'm not sure if he lived in New York or Boston. I know every time I went there, we went to either place. He had 2 places that he stayed at.
What does he do for a living?
He was a freelance photographer. or a journalist or something like that. I know he took a lot of pictures. And I met him before NAMBLA ever formed. He was part of the Boise Committee, which was the Boston Boise Committee. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It was before, it was the group that NAMBLA came out of. I mean, I was involved with that before that and stuff. They got me in touch with a bunch of people all over the country. I mean, that's how I got involved with all these different guys. They provide the names to the kids. They would never provide kids' names to the adults until they got really into it so much, in fact, that, you know, it's like David Thorstein and stuff. They weren't dummies. I mean, it's like the only way they'd start providing names of kids to other men and stuff is if they knew that this guy was having sexual relations with children and stuff on a regular basis and was very active in it. Otherwise, they wouldn't, because they were afraid that it might be undercover.
Yeah.
And they don't want anybody to know that they actually do that kind of service for people.
You want to explain what NAMBLA is?
North American Man-Boy Love Association.
And you know anything about the organization?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
The organization is, they try and make look like they're doing things for kids' rights and stuff, children's rights and stuff, to make it. But what they're actually trying to do is destroy laws that prohibit men and children from having sexual relations with each other. That's their main and only purpose, really. They try and say, well, they're against all these things, and they got these things that state all their causes and stuff. They have a magazine out that's called The Bulletin. They send it out every month, I guess. I don't receive it, so I think it's still being put out by them. And they kind of promote things that try and make it easier, or not easier, but try and pervert the rest of the world by saying, well, there's nothing wrong with sex between men and boys, or men and children, or women and children and stuff. And it's just,
Women in there too?
yeah, they got some women involved with it.
Yeah. Were you a member or anything?
I don't know if you could call me a member. I was a kid when I was growing up through it, but I was involved with them to the point where I'd march with them and stuff like that when I was like 13, 14 years old, not realizing myself what this was actually doing.
Where did you march with them?
We went to, it was an anti-nuclear demonstration in Washington, D.C.
Who's paying your expenses?
I don't know.
Would they just hand you a ticket and say, here it is? Or?
Well, no, they wouldn't hand me a ticket. They'd come and they'd pick me up. They'd have somebody pick me up every time. They wouldn't never send me alone. No, they didn't do it alone. I mean, I had to have somebody with me when
Because you were a young boy. Huh?
well, not because I was young. I mean, yeah, that's the thing about it. I had to have somebody with me, and yet I should have all rights to do whatever I want anytime I want to, but they just wanted me for the sex. They didn't want to let me run around on my own. I had to be protected still.
Yeah.
But they didn't realize it protected from them. You know, I had a whole list of everything I did with them. In fact, I had one marked NAMBLA.
We can cover that later. I'll make a note.
But an anti-nuclear demonstration I was at, they started in December of 1978. I switched to
Who's they? Continue with that. Oh, once you're going to talk about NAMBLA? Okay, we're talking about NAMBLA.
I was talking about David Thorstein.
Right, okay.
I was on how I met him.
And you're looking at your calendar there.
And I have, it's kind of marked. It's kind of weird how I mark things. I don't put anything except for,
Will that take it there? Yeah.
I'll have to use a close up on it later. It's like, I don't know how I even remember they like it marked anything. They just got NAMBLA written there. That's when they formed NAMBLA, when they actually formed it.
What's the date on that again?
December 2nd, 1978.
Were you there?
Yeah.
When they
In the
formed
Boston
NAMBLA?
Church.
Huh?
In the Boston Church, yeah.
Remember the name of the church?
I got the name of it somewhere. But I have to look it up. Boston Community Church or something like that.
Who was there when they formed it?
David Thorstad, a couple of the guys that they became the steering members later on and stuff. I'm not exactly sure who was all there. I know David Thorstad was the main one there. I believe Andretti was there. Andrea, I think it's Andrea. He was a kind of a kid at the time, so Bill Andrea. And several other guys that were there also. I'm not sure exactly.
How many people were there?
Probably 1 to 2 dozen.
Where were they from?
Mainly from Boston. They used to be called the Boston Boise Committee, and then they changed them to becoming
Boston what committee?
Boise.
Boise, okay.
Boise.
Okay.
Arguably the most important chapter in the Franklin scandal details the tragic story of investigator Gary Caradori, who seems to represent the moral decay at the heart of an ill-fated society. Author Nick Bryant explains that in July of 1989, Senator Schmidt released a 3-page report urging his subcommittee to find out where the money went and you'll find the rest, because their previous tactics had yet to yield an indictment. As an example, Schmidt cited a $2,800 credit card receipt that showed King had purchased a coat for a man who was later found shot to death. His death would unconvincingly be ruled a suicide. This shift in direction of the subcommittee prompted 3 members, including its chief investigator Jerry Lowe, to resign. In a World Herald article, Lowe stated that Schmidt informed him that there was pressure to stop the investigation, which Schmidt confirmed. "I have gotten phone calls threatening me. I've been told to leave it alone or my kids were going to be orphans." After Lowe resigned, Schmidt called upon Gary Caradori to succeed him as the Franklin Subcommittee's chief investigator. Assuming undercover disguises from priest to plumber, Caradori had a talent for finding teenage runaways enmeshed in prostitution and drugs. Caradori, a former Nebraska state patrolman, had founded an investigative firm in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the Lincoln Journal loved him. When the police tell you their hands are tied, when your only witness has skipped town, and when the justice system seems like it's breaking apart, people call Gary Caradori. Caradori went to work immediately, finding new victims and perpetrators and enemies he never anticipated. An old friend of ours who used to work for Lincoln Telephone came to the house and told us our phone was being tapped, says Caradori's wife, Sandy, a middle school English teacher. He already suspected it. When he arranged meetings over the phone, FBI agents would already be there when he arrived. In November and December 1989, Caradori interviewed Alicia Owen, Troy Boner, and Danny King, no relation to Larry King, all in their early 20s. Owen was serving time in the Nebraska Center for Women at York for writing bad checks, while Boner and Danny King were living in the Omaha area. Caradori recorded their sworn testimony on over 20 hours of videotape, where they described being flown around the country as underage prostitutes and attending grotesquely sadistic pedophilic orgies. Larry King, they said, had organized it all. In December 1989, Schmidt's subcommittee gave the videotaped statements to Attorney General Speyer and Nebraska's U.S. Attorney. Caradori videotaped a 4th victim, Paul Bonacci, in May of 1990, who corroborated Owen, Boner, and Danny King while admitting shocking and disturbing details to Caradori.
One kid was taken care of.
What do you mean?
They killed him. Somebody killed him. They grabbed him from someone. They kidnapped him. And wouldn't.
But yeah, I can't hear you.
They wouldn't stop beating on him.
Where did this take place at?
Sacramento.
And where was the boy from?
Sometime in Idaho.
What was his name?
Jeremy.
How do you know his name was Jeremy?
Because I asked him.
And what year was this?
1985.
I can't hear you.
1985.
What time in 85?
About June.
And how did you get out? And what city were you in now in June 85?
Sacramento.
And how did you get to Sacramento?
I flew.
I mean, commercial or private?
Private.
And I'm trying not to skip around here, but who did you go out there with?
I went over that time by myself.
In a private plane? They chartered a private plane just for you yourself?
Oh, I was the only kid that went.
Well, who were other?
Larry King.
Just you and Larry?
Larry King and me. It was just a small plane. It wasn't generally, it was just a single engine plane. We made several stops on the way out there.
And where did the plane? Where did you depart from?
Bethel Airfield. And we landed. It was from
Did you leave from the commercial airline side or from the other side of the airport?
from the other side.
Do you remember?
It was from trying to remember. We made stops in Grand Island and Denver. Then we stopped in Nevada.
Why would you stop in Grand Island?
We had to pick up some stuff.
What do you mean pick up stuff?
We picked up some camera equipment and stuff. Then we stopped in Denver and picked up some other kid.
Do you remember where you stopped in Grand Island?
We stopped at the airport and then we got off and we went down.
Did you take a cab or what?
No. Some guy picked us up in a red Ford pickup. Took us to this farmhouse and picked up some equipment and went back to the airport for the airplane. Flew off with
Get this
well,
one.
Larry King was the pilot that was flying the plane. Pilot started flying.
Do you remember who the pilot was?
No.
Okay. And then you went to Denver from Grand Island, is that right?
Yeah.
And what'd you do when you got to Denver?
We went into Aurora. And we picked up the kid there.
Was the kid already at the airport?
No. We went to a house in Aurora. We picked him up.
What was his name?
Nicholas.
And how old was he?
He was about 13.
You remember where the house was in Aurora?
I think so.
Okay. All right, so then what was the purpose of picking up Nicholas?
Because he was going to be taken out there with us. The filming this movie that was going to be going on.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
But after that, we flew and we stopped in Nevada,
Where in Nevada?
Las Vegas.
Okay, and how long were you there?
Just enough to, I guess, refuel and
Stretch? Did you pick up anybody else there?
no.
And then,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Then after that, we flew to Sacramento. And when we were there, I met some little Italian guy who was supposed to be some kind of producer. Like a murderer, not a producer.
I can't hear you.
Like a murderer, not a producer.
Why is that?
Because he's the one that ordered his kid to be killed.
Well, could you be a little bit more specific?
Well, they had me and this other kid they picked up in Denver.
You have to speak
And
up.
they forced us to have sex with this kid who we didn't even know what they were planning on doing with this
Wait a
little
minute.
bunch of guys.
You and which kid now?
The kid that was from Denver.
Okay. They had you two do what?
have sex with the boy that they kidnapped. And they were filming this the whole time. They told us just to do whatever we wanted and stuff. And so it was all just, everything that he was saying and stuff was all just part of the whole thing.
All right, now how old was this boy that was kidnapped?
About 12.
And how do you know he was kidnapped?
Because they told us.
Who told you?
They didn't want to tell you that it was filming.
Well, why would you believe that what he told you was true? Did the boy say that he was kidnapped?
All the boy was doing was crying and telling us to not hurt him. Nobody hurt him.
Was he used to having sex?
No.
Did he call out for his mom and dad? I mean, what? Tell me. Get detailed with me here.
No, we began to tell us to just start reach out and start doing something. Put him in there with us.
But who and where?
The boy.
Which and where? Take your time. Take your time.
Put us in a cage.
Are you in a house or are you in a hotel?
We were in a wooded area. We were inside of the wooded dog. Outside in the woods.
Okay, now let me back up. You arrived in Sacramento.
Yeah.
Where did you go when you got there?
We went to a hotel.
Okay, when you say we,
That's Larry King, the boy, me, and gang that flew us there.
okay, do you remember what hotel?
No.
Okay, do you remember what year?
It was 1985.
And what month, do you remember? Yeah, you need to look at, there's an 85 calendar right here.
About September. Just after school.
Okay, now how old were you then?
I was 18 at that time.
Almost immediately, anonymous sources started leaking to the Lincoln Journal and the Omaha World Herald that one or both of the young men videotaped by Caradori had failed FBI polygraphs. The FBI refused comment, but State Senator Jerry Chiswick denounced the leaks as a violation of federal law. "I've been around a lot of investigations in my 53 years," he said in a Lincoln Journal article, "and I've never seen one like this in my life." Despite the FBI's attempts to sabotage his investigation, Caradori continued to follow the money. In his investigative report of April 13, 1990, he described his meeting with a former employee of an airplane charter service used by Larry King. Though the woman was apprehensive about having her name connected to the Franklin investigation, she disclosed that King used her charter service on a weekly basis and routinely traveled with a number of young men who were, quote, very good looking, dressed in fancy suits, and clean cut and clean shaven. The young men, she noted, never spoke, which she found extremely strange. Obtaining hundreds of flight itineraries from 2 charter services, Caradori had proof that King chartered the planes, but very few of the itineraries had a passenger manifest or any list of people on the flight. The itineraries listed several different destinations, but most flights were to Washington, D.C. By May of 1990, Caradori had compiled a leads list of 271 people who may have been victims, perpetrators, or witnesses, and submitted it to state and federal investigators. In June 1990, Caradori warned Schmidt's subcommittee that the Douglas County grand jury was being deliberately misled by the influence of the state patrol investigator and various people in the FBI. He voiced his reluctance to furnish the evidence he was amassing to the Nebraska State Patrol and FBI, as the subcommittee had ordered, because they were using it to sabotage his investigation. Caradori also testified that he had been trying to obtain pictures of King's orgies. Some of the victims he interviewed mentioned a photographer named Rusty Nelson, photographer in the Omaha area who was employed by Mr. King, alleged to have taken pornographic photos of children and to have also directed sexual activity for photographs, said Nelson's entry on Caradori's leads list. Caradori referenced 5 videotape exhibits and an OPD report implicating Nelson in possible child pornography, noting that he lived in a luxury apartment sublet from Larry King. Author Nick Bryant writes that in 2003, I located Rusty Nelson living in a Columbus, Nebraska trailer park. I spent hours with him, judging his veracity, and ultimately discerned numerous contradictory statements that severely impugn his credibility. He has also been imprisoned for the possession of child pornography, but at the same time, Caradori's investigation clearly tied him to King. King hired me to take pictures of adults and children in compromising positions, Nelson tells me. The pictures showed who the adults were and who the kids were. I gathered that the purpose was blackmail. and it was political. The content of the pictures and the events surrounding them would be an instant end to a politician's career. Nelson went on to say that King had attempted to pressure him into hardcore activities, and their relationship fissured. He described being a part of the network as, "You're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on this yacht, and everybody is enjoying themselves on this yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown." He says that the FBI then started to harass him, not to force his disclosures about King's pedophile ring, but to silence him. He fled Nebraska and moved to New Mexico, where Caradori first contacted him. Nelson promised Caradori incriminating photographs, and they agreed to meet in Chicago. Caradori, accompanied by his 8-year-old son AJ, flew his single-engine Piper Saratoga from Lincoln to Chicago on July 7, 1990. The mission, he said to his wife, was to meet Nelson and then go to the Major League All-Star game with AJ. "I met with Caradori briefly," says Nelson. "I just gave him the pictures and got out of there." Caradori phoned Senator Schmidt from Chicago, exclaiming, "We got them by the short hairs." The Piper Saratoga conveniently crashed around 2 a.m. on July 11th in a cornfield near Ashton, Illinois, killing both Caradori and his 8-year-old son. Remnants of the plane were scattered up to 1,800 feet from the fuselage, indicating that it had broken up in flight. 2 days later, FBI Special Agent Michael Mott and a colleague delivered a subpoena to Caradori's grieving widow, demanding all of her husband's Franklin evidence. Caradori's investigative assistant, Karen Ormiston, told the investigators from Britain's Yorkshire Television that someone had tampered with Caradori's vehicles before his death, and she felt sabotaged his airplane. Many of his possessions were missing from the wreckage, she said, including the briefcase that presumably held the photographs. She also asserted that Caradori's death was effectively the end of the Franklin investigation because additional witnesses were too frightened to emerge from the shadows. "There were many victims," Ormiston said. "We knew of more. There are more. They're still out there. They're afraid to come forward." Senator Schmidt submitted an affidavit stating that he had been warned that Caradori's life was in danger. He also wrote a letter to the National Transportation Safety Board regarding the missing back seats of Caradori's plane. I do not know anything about sabotage, but I have been told that a phosphorus-type bomb would in fact vaporize metal and any other material with which it came in contact, and that unless someone knew what they were looking for, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to detect. I am sure there will be those who will scoff at such a suggestion, but there have been entirely too many violent deaths associated with this investigation. The Franklin scandal exposes our cognitive dissonance, forcing us to grapple with the psychological consequences of a corrupt system designed to protect prolific predators in the elite strata of society who have strategically forged political connections and media influence. A dark and twisted odyssey revealing a nationwide pedophile network pandering children to America's power elite. We conclude the episode with one final statement by Nick Bryant, the author of this incredible book, serving as our primary source document, The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. He explains, I wasn't so much anguished by the threats and intimidation I endured delving into the arcane mysteries of this universe, but rather by the realization of its very existence. A universe that encompasses the refined, industrial destruction of children and its cover-up by the very state and federal authorities who have pledged to protect children from the depravity of evil men. The children and our society as a whole have been betrayed.